Let's turn this metal here into an engine mount. Time to remount the motor. We need to do that before we end up doing the intercooler piping. I really should have done this first, but as I say, with this car, it's just been a domino effect. We haven't stuck to any plan, and we just keep doing more and more and more. Like, it would have been nice from the get-go to just remount the whole gearbox and engine first if I knew I was going to go this far with it, and start all over again. The manifold would have been a lot easier. Everything would have been a lot more easier. But anyhow, we're here, so we've got to work around what we've already got. So I'm not too sure if you can tell, but even through the lens, you can tell that this angle is actually sitting on an angle, and it sits to the left-hand side a little bit more than the right. So we need to centralize that motor, try and drop the angle a bit. It'd be nice if we can, but there's something pretty close to the factory cross member. And our alternator, just off the rail. So hopefully we move it that way, we have enough adjustment for the belt. And the next issue is we're pretty close to that strut tower there, and we need that compressor housing in that position so the intercooler pipe runs parallel, because I don't want them on an angle because it'll look ugly. So there we have it. There goes the old mounts. Obviously ugly as. Old squares. That was just ticked on there. So why they were in there, because we had to solder mount it at one stage, and it was just before the dyno had a bad vibration. So I remember late at night we were just underneath there, and just threw in a little bit of box section. Couldn't see what we're doing, just trying to MIG weld it on. Nice looking welds. So yeah, let's remount it. This is roughly going to be our position on the motor now. Let's see. We'll fine tune it later on. Got that angle there set to roughly 4 degrees. It's given us a lot more clearance, obviously, just because we've dropped it down now. Heater clearance down the alternator. Similar-ish there, so it's come down a bit more, so now we can rotate the compressor housing more, because it was hitting up here before, as you can see, for the scratch marks. Downside is now obviously the wastegate doesn't fit, but that's the easy part. We can remount that, that's no problem. So pretty happy with that. It looks so much better in here. Like, ever since day dot this car, you can always tell how bad it's sat off center and on an angle. So hopefully this gets rid of a lot of our vibration issues we had. Concentrically now we're sitting roughly around 369 from the right hand side chassis rail, and the left hand side we are 367 ish, so that's pretty good. About 2-3 mil difference, so about 2-3 mils to the left hand side still, which is not too bad considering beforehand this was sitting 35 mil that way. So yeah, happy as how it's sitting now. I think what I might do, I think it's just going to start touching that cross member, so once the motor's out I'll just do a quick notch in that cross member, and this should help with the oil pan clearance. We have a nice clean slate now. I cut off those box sections that everyone was loving, so they're gone now. You won't have to ever see them again. What I was planning was utilising these pedestals here and just making an engine bracket to go across. But if you look at a rotary engine, I don't know if a lot of you have noticed, but you can see the centre line of your motor, and look how offset the mounting points are on the front cover. So that's why you'll have a long side on this side and there's a little short side on this side. So yeah, that'll just bug me too much. I won't be able to centralise it. So what I'm going to do is probably just cut this whole cross member out and weld one just going straight across there. And you'll see the design shortly. The way I'll do it, you won't even know that it's offset. It should look quite good. Now that the old cross member is out, I'll clean these up later on. One is on the hoist, it'll be a lot easier. So now we can make some tabs, and then we can make our bracket that's going to go straight across. Let's have a look how we're going to mount it off the chassis. Really simple. So here goes our plate that's already welded to the chassis rail, and we're just going to have some tabs coming off like this. So if you're looking from underneath the car, it'll look like that. They'll look straight up and down. We're also going to have some braces. So that's what these parts here are. So these will be the braces. So they'll sort of go across there, down to there, same going up to the top. And if you look at it, that's how it'll be. So there goes our tabs, and then we'll have mounts going that way, up and across. Here goes our tabs all cut out. I love using the bandsaw, it gives such an accurate cut, and it's way quicker than the grinder too. This way here, there's no smell and there's no sparks or anything. It's really good to use. So anyhow, what we're going to be doing now is we're going to be drilling the holes. So we'll put them all together, put them in the vise and the drill, plunge through, then shape out, and then after that we can weld into the chassis rail. That's simple. I'll put some tape on here to give you guys a quick visual representation on what's happening and how I got to this point and why I landed the bolt hole there. You know, it's not about just making a little plate like this, throwing a bolt hole random, and then you're good to go. Well, you know, people probably do that, but yeah, things got to look good. So what I did is I went 26 mil from here to the center of the hole. So this hole is actually 12.5, but we'll just keep round figures, so 6 mil diameter. And why I wanted to land the bolt hole there is because the bushing behind it, it's going to be roughly around 25 to 30 mil. So I just quickly drew that by eye, and that's going to be roughly around an inch there, 25 mil. And I wanted it to be covered within the perimeter of the mount. So there's no point putting the bolt hole, say, close to here on the edge, and then all of a sudden it's going to be hanging outside the perimeter there of the mount. And this way here we've got enough meat on this side here, it's nearly halfway. We've got a lot more strength that way too. So yeah, that's how I managed to figure out where I landed the bolt hole. As we can see our basic shape now. All we need to do is put the radius on the end. We're ready to weld on. Roughed it out there with the old flapper wheel. It's got its basic shape now, so I'll pull them apart and individually grind them all up, throw them on the little belt sander there, deburr them, countersink the holes, and ready for the chassis rails. Here we have them all done now. We put a chamfer on there, gives it more of a welding surface area, makes it a bit stronger. It took way longer to make this video than it did to actually make these things. If I wasn't recording, these probably would take under an hour to make. You know, there's probably people out there going, oh, why don't you get them laser cut? Well, look, there's no fun in getting them laser cut. Anyone can do that. You can't say you built a car if you haven't done it all from scratch. We're up to our final stage now, and as we know, the plates on the car already have a 40 mil hole. So we want to land these on either side of the hole, obviously, so we've got somewhere to weld onto. So I'm going to use a bit of stud bar with these two nuts on the inside. That way there we can open or close it and basically have this measurement between here exactly where we want it. Then what we do is obviously cut it off and put two nuts on the outside, and that will lock it into the exact position where we want it. Car's now back on the hoist, going to make it a bit easier to access the weld. Input clearance on the alternator, so that's at its max setting. So now we can set these mounts up and then start making this front brace. Since the lathe tooling hasn't turned up yet, it could be another few weeks away. What I ended up doing, since I can't machine up the bushes that go in here, I've just put a washer there and obviously a stud, and it's all size for size. We'll centralize it, I'll tack it on, that way there we can continue with the project. And this is where we're going to be mounting the front engine bracket off. The dummy bushes are all done now, and if you remember previously I mentioned that I didn't want the bush housing, that part there, to stick out past the perimeter of the mount. So it's basically bang on. The outside diameter of that is exactly, if you look down there, look down the sides, it's bang on. Yeah, happy with that. Should look quite good, all concealed. That engine mount's now ready to weld in. I've set it on a 3-degree angle backwards, so everything's running true and parallel as the motor's on a 3-degree angle backwards as well. So that way there, you're not running like a 0 there and a 3 degrees there, and it's trying to fight itself and just put more strain on the engine mount than you need. We're now up to cutting up the box section for the engine bracket. So as we can see, we're going to have to do it in 3 pieces. I tried it before just as a test by putting a cut into it, bending it, but it didn't work. So if you think about this, so if you're looking on top of the engine mount, it's going to be sitting back towards the car and also on an angle up like that. And you obviously can't do that type of cut in a bandsaw, so it's going to be a lot of cutting and grinding by hand. So these are roughly our measurements. They're about 10 mil longer here. That's solely because I left enough so we can notch out here. That's going to weld onto the bush housing. And you'll obviously, the tabs are like that. So these will be the engine bush housing, or whatever you want to call them. That's basically it. As for the bottom one, it's going to be basically similar. And these ones here will just be made up as we go. Whatever those angles will be. So just be all cut by hand. Now cutting out the first part of the engine brace. It's going to be the top one that runs across there. Here goes the engine bracket all tacked up. Welded just the corners there. So just put some marks here as I want to start putting the little gussets in, just to give it a bit of design really. Got most of it done today, just got to do the final weld up. These took ages because my bandsaw wouldn't cut that angle, so I had to cut them out by hand, and if I overground them by about 1 or 2 mil sort of thing, they end up being too big, you have to start again. Same as these, trying to get these angles right here because they angle up that way and also back towards the car. So obviously you can't cut that type of angle in the bandsaw, so there's a lot of cut, grind, 2, ended up being too small, throw them out, So I've done these heaps, redone these heaps, and obviously those ones there. Probably done about 10 of those ones there in the middle. So anyhow, we're all done now, just got to fully weld it up. Here we have our engine brace basically done. All we got left now is to do the recess pockets for the bolts to go into and weld the backside. What we've done is, you can see we've welded the braces in, linished them off. What we've used to linish them are these little things here, they're called Rolocks. You get an adapter, I can't do it with one hand and show you how they screw off, but basically there's a screw off, as you can see, screw on. Well, I'm not using these, so you use sandpaper, you get in different grades, sandpaper, and they're basically like a red Scotch-Brite. And that's a finer one. Then you also get the little gold ones. Why I like using them is because, as everyone knows, when you try and linish stuff, especially with a flapper wheel, you can end up undercutting the metal. We don't want that. So it keeps it nice and flat. And yeah, so what else we got to do is, obviously we couldn't get into the corners. We could only linish the flat side, so you can see like little bits like that. So we end up tuning that up with the die grinder later on. All the corners, that's basically the engine mount done. Here goes our bolt hole pockets, cut them out. So obviously they're going to go in here, like that. Basically just fuse them on, and that way there, they're basically size for size for the cap screws that go in there. It'll be all nice and a flush, be no ugly bolts sticking out. And that way there we can remove the engine bracket without having to remove the studs, because if you have studs, obviously you can't lift the motor out. So this is going to be the nicest way, and it'll look all nice and seamless and sit flush. There we have it, the motor's all mounted in the car now. Still got a few small jobs to finish on this brace here, so we got to do the final linish, clean up the corners as we mentioned earlier. But you can see the bolt holes now, how it's sitting all flush, looking really nice. You might be wondering why within the design I didn't start the taper from here backwards, and why it looks so wide is solely because of this oil cooler fitting. So this is not the one we're going to run, but it was just an example. If I ran the longest one possible, say if I started the taper back from here towards the chassis, we wouldn't be able to run the dash fitting. So yeah, it's pretty tight underneath there. You can still get the spanner on to tighten it too, so there's a lot of thinking in this. It's not just cut some metal, weld it together and make it work. What else we'll do is finish off the welds, machine the bushes, change those studs out for bolts, and yeah, that's basically it. Now we can finish the rest of the fab work.